This is Gary Swanson interviewing Ann Brownfield for the Historic Garment District project of the Historic Garment District Museum of Kansas City. We're doing this interview on November the 14th, 2005 in Ann's home. Ann, when did you first get into the garment industry in Kansas City?
Well, in Kansas City, I didn't get here until about 1960. And of course, things were going very, very well in the manufacturing industry in Kansas City at that time. There were jobs available, and most of the factories, there probably were still about 50 to 60 manufacturing companies here in the Kansas City area at that time.
Well, let's go back a little bit then, because you have a history of design and being involved in the garment industry before Kansas City.
Oh yeah.
Okay, let's start with where your career began in fashion design and fashion merchandising, etc.
Well, the fashion design started, I went to Stevens College when it was still a 2-year college, and it was, and strictly took fashion design and a few little courses that I had to throw in, English and humanities and some other little things. And I won a scholarship from Stevens College to go on to Washington U in St. Louis, which had a very large design center. And Washington U had connections with the manufacturers in the St. Louis area. St. Louis was the largest junior dress manufacturing in the country. And they also did junior sportswear. And so when I got out of Washington U, my picture was sent to some people in Union, Missouri, called Glamour Shoe Company, and I had taken some shoe design courses, and they sent the picture of our class to the company that was looking for a designer. And at that time, most of the designers of shoes were men, and they picked me out, and I went on the bus 50 miles out and 50 miles back to Union, Missouri from St. Louis every day. They hired me, and I was there for probably about 2 or 3 months when I found out why they really hired me. Not only had I had won some design awards at Washington U for my shoe design, but they also picked me because I was the smallest one in the class, and they figured that I could model their 4B shoes, and that was the size that they made at that time. Well, I was really kind of more of a 4.5, but I could squeeze into the 4B shoes. And so that career lasted until they sold out to, for a couple of years, sold out to International Shoe Company in St. Louis. And St. Louis was the biggest shoe industry in the country at that time. They had shoe factories all over Missouri. Every little town in Missouri had a shoe factory, which was their major thing to keep small towns going at that time. And that went downhill probably faster than anything else when the shoe industry started to go overseas. So anyway, after a couple of years I was without a job, but I went right back into St. Louis and had friends in the business, and got a job right away with a junior sportswear house. And that was very good until one day one of the gentleman called, his name was Mr. Cohen, and he came in and he said there's a real good assistant designer job open with a place called Halmar Juniors, and they were a hot junior line in St. Louis. And he said, well, if you'd like the job, he said, I'll put in a word for you. Well, it paid about 3 times what I was making. I think I was making $35 a week or something designing the sportswear line, and they were going to boop it up to $75 a week. So naturally I interviewed for the job and got that. So I did start that, and was a very, very good situation. The designer was Eileen Younger, and she was an excellent designer and a good designer at placing embroidery like on little jackets and around the neckline or around the sleeves. And so I learned an awfully lot from her. It was a very good thing that I got to work with one of the top designers in St. Louis at that time. And then I got pregnant with my first child, and I stayed on there until, let's see, we got the line finished on Friday night, got it out to the salesman on Saturday, and I had her on Sunday, Sunday or Monday, I can't remember. But it was a close finish. And
How long were you in St. Louis then before you came to Kansas City?
oh golly, I was in St. Louis for another couple, 2-3 years, and worked for another firm as their head designer in St. Louis. Was Freilich dresses, and they were more of a Missy, but it was a very, very expensive Missy line, and that was a very good job. And then my husband at that time, who was Bob Lawmeyer, got transferred to Grand Island, Nebraska. And when I was in Grand Island, Nebraska for a couple of years, I signed up to teach a design class at the new facility at the high school that had a whole new sewing section. And so I said, okay, I will take on 6 or 8 students to teach pattern making and design in a 6 weeks course, but they already had to know how to sew before I could take them, because starting from scratch would not have been good. They already had to know that to go on into pattern making and design. So they put the ad in the paper, and 36 women showed up to take the class. So I ended up teaching 3 nights a week, and for 6 weeks. And at the end of 6 weeks, we had a fashion show that they're probably still talking about, and that was in 1954, somewhere around in there. And then from there, we were transferred to Wichita. And Wichita, I was kind of out of the design business. And then in 1960, we moved to Kansas City, and I started working for, my first job here was Danny and Debby Dare with Harry Shopmaker. And that was kind of interesting. I had done children's wear before, but and I'd won some awards for children's wear. But then some better jobs came up with one as the sportswear designer, sports dress designer for Mendel Silverman, which was called the Travelable line of Mendel. And that was a good situation, and we did very well. Mendel did very well. We all did very well, and I worked in connection with a very excellent designer, Jenny Schmidt, and she did the Mendel dressy dresses and suits, and I did the sportswear. So that was an interesting job, and there I acquired a assistant there, and so we were able to turn out a lot of garments designed for Mr. Silverman, because with an assistant and as a designer, and then I could do first patterns also and draping, and then Lee Nyman was my assistant designer, and we worked very well together. And from there I went to, I was there several years, and I went to Brand Puritz Coat and Suit House as their overall, really more their stylist, because I worked with 3 other designers. And in the coat and suit business, most of the designers were men, again, and from the old country and from Nova Scotia. And they were originally in menswear, so the transfer from menswear to women's coats and suits was an easy transfer for these menswear designers. And I worked with, one was Pauline Tregere's first husband, who was, his name was Lazar Radley. And he didn't like me at first. He didn't think that I knew anything, which I didn't, about the coat and suit business, but I was a fast, quick learn, and we suddenly became, we became friends after a while. But the rest of the designers worked with me beautifully. Henry Corstan worked with me in doing the children's coats and the preteen coats. And
The reason they had so many designers was because they had so many different
they
lines?
had so many different lines. Yeah, Mr. Radley was the one that did all of the coats and suits for the Missy line, and then Murray Breyer did the couture line. So I worked with all of these three gentlemen in putting 250 coats in the line each season, which we did like 2.5 seasons, and it was a full-time job. But really, my job there was to go around the country, talk to the buyers that we did business with, or some that we didn't do business with, and see what were their best sellers. And in some cases, I would buy a coat or a suit and we bring it back to copy. We called them knockoffs at that time. And then it was my position to work with totally with Mr. Levitch, and he showed me how to buy fabrics, and then eventually I did all the fabric buying for for all the three lines, and I would go even to Interstoff in Germany to see all of the European fabrics, and that was always exciting. They had to send an interpreter with me because a lot of them at that time did not speak English, and we ended up buying some French fabrics for the couture line, and also we did from Wales, Scotland and Wales. We did some business with a few woolen mills over there, but 90% of our fabrics for the coat and suit line for Brand Puritz were made in America.
How many of your designs of the coat and suit line made it into the line, actually sold and got repeat orders for and so on? Would you design 300 to wind up with 200, or?
Oh, probably design around 200 that would go into the line. And for one reason or another, either the fabric was too expensive, or nobody liked the design, or it didn't fit into our look. Maybe our design was too far ahead of the game, because we were strictly middle of the road people, and they didn't want real far out Paris designs from us. And I would say that probably 60% of the initial designs were cut and shipped to stores from Seattle to New York.
And so how long were you with Brand Puritz?
Oh golly, I think I was there for maybe 8 or 9 years before I.
Now this was during the heyday of the garment
Oh,
business
yeah.
in Kansas City, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
this is in the 60s. Yeah, we were still big time, and we still had probably 60 manufacturers in the area still at that time. From 75, we started out with about 75. The very first garment factory that was in Kansas City, I understand, was in the late 20s, was Camille Azar, which made robes and little house dresses and more like lingerie.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And Kansas City, to the best of your knowledge, was almost all women or children's clothes, wasn't it? Except for, let's say, Kansas City Custom Garment Company, which is men's suits.
that's
Were there
right.
any other men's manufacturing?
Not
that
that
you know of?
not that I know of, other than Nat Nast and
With bowling shirts and personalized shirts?
Yeah, personalized shirts, and also the learners with
King Louis?
King Louis, right, right.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as I know, those were the only other menswear type things. But as far as the coats and suits, most of the Kansas City market was done. There were men's tailors. There were quite a few men's tailors that would make one of a kind. For if you came in, they would fit you and make one suit. You would pick out your fabric and so on. But they never were in the big manufacturing. But the Kansas City Garment Company did do that.
And so, again, how long were you at Brand Puritz?
I think it was about 8 years.
So from 60 to 68, and had things started going downhill yet in the garment industry in 1968?
No. Well, yeah, in 68 they had, but in between that, until when I left Brand Puritz, I started my own factory. And
You left Brand Puritz to start your own factory.
right.
You knew you could design it, so you
Yeah,
found out all about the rest of it.
I
So
learned a lot, and what I never did learn to do, I could hire somebody to do. So I had a nice little factory over in Kansas City, Kansas at 10th and Minnesota in the old Gorman Furniture Building. And Al Yettis, Abe and Al Yettis owned the building, so they let me in there for like $75 a month. And I set up, I had, at one time, I usually had about 6 people working for me, but when I had big numbers to put out, why, I had 12, 14 people that worked in our factory.
And what were you designing, manufacturing, and selling then?
Well, my first contract was to make the window garment, the sample garment, for all of the House of Fabrics. And they had about 14, 15 stores across the country. And they wanted to show the same thing in everyone, the same design in every one of their stores every week. So that was our weekly contract, to put out 14, 15 of these dresses for the House of Fabrics. Mr. Harry Eisen was the one that hired me to do that, and that was our very first order. Well, we got so that we could put those 14 dresses out in probably less than 3 days. So that left me with people with nothing to do for another couple of days. So I had to go out and knock on doors, and it was that was interesting, because I knew everybody over on the Broadway, in the Broadway area, and when they had something that they couldn't do, like individual dresses for the Sweet Adeline group up in St. Joe, they would call me and say, would you want to, talk to these people? And I would take the little kind of like the leftovers, because I could see where there was a niche in the market of doing 1 or 2 at a time, and like a half a dozen or a dozen things. For like the Jones store, I would do custom label things for them, and Swanson's, I did coats for them. They would have a coat that was selling very well, or a suit, and they couldn't get it anymore. The manufacturer had moved on to doing the next line, and they still wanted that same coat or suit, and they would commission me to put their label in our work, of course. And so I did a lot of work for both Swanson's and the Jones store, and so that kind of took up the slack. We did the warm-up suits for the U.S. Olympic ski team that went to that first in Japan. I think it was
Sapporo?
Sapporo, yeah, it was in Sapporo, Japan. And so we did the warm-up suits. Bonnie Bell was the one that commissioned us to make those, because they were individually made. They did all the measurements, and some of those thighs on some of those girls were like this, and we had to make this little bitty waistline, and then the legs for this the warm-up suit, which appeared in the Life magazine. I don't know whether I still have that or not, but so we did really custom work on a manufacturing basis, and that was fun. That was really a.
How long did you have your own factory
I had
then?
it for about 12 years.
About 12 years.
Yeah, so then that was until about 1979 and that was when then people were going out of business in the garment business at the 8th and Broadway area.
And what was the handwriting on the wall for you? You weren't getting overflow orders, and you weren't getting new orders from people?
The orders were still available to go out and get, but what I lost was my sewers. One of them came up to me one day and she says, "I'll be 84 and my husband wants me to quit." So I mean, I was running out of trained machine operators, and I could see I got down to like 3 people that I could really count on, and but anything would take more than 3 people to produce, so I could just see that it was not going anywhere very fast. So that was when I closed my factory in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And there were still some factories left in Kansas City at that time, but the last one that I know to go out of business was Hal Hardin, who took over the slack where Nellie Don left off. He started his own because he had been with Nellie Don for a number of years as their sales manager, and he could see that there was still a market for the Nellie Don type dress, and so he stayed in until 1988, I believe it was, and so that was pretty much the end of the garment center in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm. I mean, most of the coats and suits went away,
Yeah.
and the dresses were the last thing to go, as you
Right.
best remember?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. To the best of your knowledge, is there any garment manufacturing in Kansas City today?
Oh, there may be some jacket people. I don't know whether they're still out in Blue Springs. I think there was, and maybe over in Riverside, but mostly items that they sell to, to put your initials on, that for not for stores, but for companies to give to their employees and that sort of thing. But as far as any major, H.D. Lee still has under the they still have maybe some factories outlying. They still do a lot of their designing here in Kansas City, but as far as any major factories, I think they're probably all overseas at this point.
Now, when you had your own factory for those 12 years, you were doing your own designing.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, if somebody would bring you, Adler's would say, "This is an old item, but it sells real well. I want to get some more of these." You just knock it off and put their label in it, and
Right.
and away you'd go.
Right. I'd make the pattern and grade it, and then and many times I would spread, cut, and sew the same thing. the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
So when the end was in sight, but for your particular company, as it was for many others in Kansas City at that time, you never left the garment business very far away, did you?
I never got very far from it.
What did you begin doing then?
Well, then there was an opening at Swanson's in their couture division, and as a sales person, and so I took that job, not realizing that standing on the floor for 8 hours a day and 5-inch high heels was going to kill you. And so I've kind of stayed in the retail end of things. For I had worked in the couture at or the designer section of both Jones and Dillard's.
Is there any design work being done in the couture sections of in Kansas City today?
Not that I know of.
Retail?
No, no.
Mm-hmm.
There's one little gal that over in the Crossroads, Laura McGrew, who started a small factory called Tomboy, and she's doing kind of one of a kind of, but no major manufacturing. She's just doing special garments.
Mm-hmm. And is there any money to be made doing that? Probably not really, is there?
No,
Not very
no,
much. Not on
there
one.
there never was any good money in making one of a kind for somebody, because they always figured that if you made it in your home or something, that it should that
Sure.
a $500 dress should only cost $100 to them.
Sure.
And so no, there never has been any real money in that division in the Kansas City area.
So what are you doing today?
Now I am doing the tours for the Garment Center from 6th and Central over to 8th and Broadway, and telling people about the buildings along the way, and who resided in those buildings, and little stories about the people that were in the businesses. And then I have started to collect memorabilia and garments that were from the actual garment center and the manufacturers in the Kansas City area.
Have you been able to track down a garment from each of those companies, pretty much? Or?
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
I have, people have responded very well to giving me their items and calling me to see if this particular item was made in the Kansas City area, because I only want the ones that were made in our factories here.
Mm-hmm.
And then some people had given me their little 25-year pins from Nellie Don or Fashion Built, or some of that was one of the little rituals that they had in giving their employees something. Other than benefits, they didn't have very many benefits at that time.
Mm-hmm. Was there looking back on when Kansas City was at its heyday in the garment manufacturing, you were a part of that. Was the designer community pretty close? Did you know all the designers
Oh, yeah.
in town?
Yeah.
Hey, how many would you guess at one time, if we had, what'd you say, up to 90 factories probably at one time? Did you say that?
No, I think there were like 70 at
Okay,
one
like
time.
70
Yeah,
factories at one time. How many designers supported those 70 factories? Any idea?
Oh, golly. Some of the designers were the master pattern makers, so including those, every factory had a designer. Every one of the factories had a designer. The ones that were here in the 60s when I got here were the designers at Betty Rose and Fashion Built, Uscraft, Lewis Walters, of course Brand Puritz. And the Nellie Don group. I knew all of those ladies out there.
Mm-hmm.
Those were.
Did you get together regularly? I mean, did you have like
No.
kind of an informal designers association? Though?
No. There was
Never
a very exclusive, and still is, Fashion Group International, which is a group of women only in the fashion world, whether they be buyers, designers, and so on. And so there were probably eight or 10 of us that were in that club, and we met like once a month, and so we kept in contact, and there were many times that we all got on the same plane and went to New York to buy fabrics, and and then would all come back on late Sunday night flight. So there was lots of chit chat as to what's going on. And very, very friendly, very friendly. It was competitive, but it was a friendly, competitive type.
Well, and you have done some of it, but name some of these designers that whose names have probably been forgotten, but not by you.
Well, Elizabeth Wilson and Ethlyn Taylor were two of the designers at Betty Rose. Then my friend Eugene Leibovitz was with Youthcraft, and then later on with Fashion Belt. And there was Mr. Wolf in that group. I didn't know him too well. Seymour Weiner sort of designed, but he had Joe Glorioso was one of his designers. Oh golly, trying to think who all was in the fashion group. Well, Elizabeth was probably my best friend in that. Oops.
Yeah, you're still there, huh?
Elizabeth Wilson was probably my best friend in the design.
When did it become apparent to you, Ann, that the garment industry domestically and in Kansas City was dying?
Well, of course, I got the clue in St. Louis when the shoe business all went to overseas and Taiwan, and of course we'd always done work with Italy, but the shoe business was probably the first indication that we were closing the factories in mid-Missouri and in St. Louis. And shortly after that, then the St. Louis junior dress houses and sportswear houses started to go out. And I thought, ooh, so really I think the reason that Kansas City stayed on another almost 20 years, probably close to 20 years longer than the manufacturers in St. Louis is because car coats came in and raincoats, all weather coats came in, and those two items were what saved us in the business to stay in a little bit longer than the rest of the country. Dallas stayed in sort of about the same time. Went out about the same time we did, but actually we stayed in as long as anybody. There still are a few manufacturers left in the New York area, and a few in Chicago, and a few on the West Coast, Los Angeles area, but mostly in sportswear and couture dresses.
They're more leading edge, where they're not knockoffs, where the industry, the need of the consumer isn't as well understood overseas as it is by the people living it over here, and they're still able to capitalize on it.
Right.
Hey, in your view, was it the foreign influence alone that caused the demise of the industry? Were there other factors?
Well, there were a lot of factors that determined it in the Kansas City area. We ran out of workers, for one thing, because we had started out in the late 20s with immigrants. Kansas City employed 4,000 to 5,000 women and men in the manufacturing area, and 90% of them were immigrants. And as a matter of fact, we were the number 2 employer in the Kansas City area at the turn of the century. And the packing houses were number 1 at employing, and the manufacturing of garments was number 2. And we still got our workers from the immigration. Even through the 60s, we were still. I don't know if you remember Eugene Leibovitz saying that he made in the Holocaust. He lived through that because he made German uniforms. He was able to cut and sew those. So when he came over here, the transfer from uniforms to coats and suits was easy for him. Besides, he was a good designer. But so we ran out of workers. Actually, I mean, the kids of the immigrants did not want to be in the manufacturing business. They did not want to sit at a sewing machine all day long. They wanted to be white collar, blue collar workers, whatever. Actually, they wanted my job. They didn't want they didn't want to sew. They wanted to be the designer. So that was a bit of a factor. And then people got, as they got older, they retired. And so, and with no young people coming into the business, it was, that was one thing. And then with the starting of really wonderful factories overseas. I mean, there were people to work. They had pride in their work like we did. I mean, they made a darn good garment. With Brand Puritz, we had sort of an incident where we tried to make our raincoats in Taiwan, I believe it was, and we cut them here and bundled them and sent them over there to be sewn, but they didn't follow the directions very well, so some of the black coats came out with red or purple linings. The beige coats came out with green linings. I mean, we had to almost take them apart and remake them when they got back over here, because we didn't have someone over there overseeing the actual work. So that was kind of that did not work out. Then we started to lose our customer. Our best customers were the small stores like Wolf Brothers and Hartsfield's, Cricket West, Chasnoff's, some of the smaller stores that bought our garments, which was true of the small mom and pop stores all the way across the country. They went out of business when the Walmarts came in, or the bigger stores like the Dillard's, and we were not able to, if Dillard's would have given us an order for 10,000 coats for all of their stores, we could not have produced it. We were not capable of producing those big orders. And so that sort of eliminated our customer there. And just frankly, we just lost our customer. And the union stayed in and told us we had to pay X amount for every operation, and they would not back down, so that our costs were more than the overseas costs. And but one thing and another was just our demise. That's all. And I did not see that coming as fast as it did come. I didn't realize it was.
Yeah, the onslaught from the east gathered a lot of momentum, didn't it? And,
oh yeah.
And today, of course, that's where it's all done.
Right.
Now they're shopping countries to find a cheaper country than the last country.
Well,
in order to produce goods.
Looks like China's the winner at this point in time. They're really gearing up to do the manufacturing.
So let's see, how long have you been, including now, because you're still in the industry, how many years have you spent in the industry from?
Well, let's see, from 1951 to...
Okay, so that's...
over 50 years.
Over 50 years.
Yeah.
And may you have...
it's gone by in a hurry.
Many more. As you look back on that period of time, how would you kind of capsulize it? That's a hard question to ask, and a harder one to answer, probably. But are you glad you did it?
Sure.
Were you glad you invested your life apart from family and friends?
It was a fun life. It was you created something new every day. You had winners and losers. You had things that sold and things that didn't, so you didn't do those again. So you learned daily of things that were going on. And as I said, I learned enough from working for everybody else to open my own factory, which was very successful. I found a niche, and yeah, I was able to put my kids through school
Mhm.
and do all the. Yeah, it was a good life. It was a fun life. I wouldn't have wanted to do anything else. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's a great testimony. I may it continue for you, Ann, as you work with the museum and showing people today who don't know what happened here many years ago, what did go on in the garment industry and what a big deal
was
it
a
was
tough-
in Kansas City.
It was a hard business. It was a hard working business, and
And people were hard workers, weren't they?
They
Because
were.
the immigrant people, many of them, the owners even, as well as the sewers,
exactly, yeah,
and
yeah. A lot of the owners were immigrants, sure.
so they knew that hard work would pay off, and certainly they did work hard, and it did pay off.
They worked hard, and in the design end of things, you designed all day, all night. I mean, there were no 8 to 5 hours. You were always creating something. There were some days you couldn't think of a thing, but there were other days where you could turn out lots of different things. So
How about you had many nights where you woke up and thought, this is what I've been thinking about. I mean, maybe created something in your mind, maybe solved a problem to a design
yeah,
at night. So you were like probably an author of a book or a painter. You're thinking about it 24 hours a day, aren't you?
exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Always had a little sketch pad next to my bed on the nightstand. So,
Well-
but it was an interesting life that I would suggest it to anybody that wanted to get into that field, but they do have to learn to work. It's not just drawing a pretty picture. You've got to know where the darts go. You've got to know where the buttons go. You have to know how long the sleeves are to be. You have to know all the technical things that you don't get in just drawing a pretty picture.
Hmm. Well, Ann, I think you pretty well covered your participation in the garment industry, not only in Kansas City, but starting out in school at Stevens, then in St. Louis, and it's been a big part of your life, and I know it's brought a lot of joy to you. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you, Gary.
You're welcome.
Okay.